Are human beings little more than fleshy little pattern recognition machines? We seek to connect things that have no right being connected. We're red string pullers, conspiracy theorists, and poets alike. G'day mate, and how the bloody hell are you? Welcome to In the Back of My Head podcast, episode 83. It's a creative journal. It's a place that I jot down some ideas and ramble on about creativity, about the world at large, about whatever's in the back of my head, trying to make sense of some things. I'm trying to form coherent thought. I'm trying to make sense of what I actually think. And if you get anything out of this episode or any other episode, it's bloody brilliant, mate. I hope that you do. This statement might sound a little bit egotistical, it might sound like I'm full of myself. I don't mean it as such, but I struggle to make art that is meaningless. And don't get me wrong, I don't mean it in the way of that I create with such deep thought, deep meaning, deep connections, that it is some sort of profound work, that it is work of a genius. No, I don't think most of what I make has that much depth to it. Surface level, intriguing imagery is kind of the realm that I splash about in. Imagery is like everything. Imagery is everything to me as both as a creative and also as an audience member to any form of art, really. The imagery is what draws me in, as what keeps me there, as what pushes me to create the next thing. It's what excites me. I'm always searching for the next image, both literally and figuratively, that is going to excite me. It doesn't have to be inherently meaningful. It doesn't have to actually say anything with clear intent. It's more about the patterns and the connections, how two things connect, how two things become entwined that perhaps had no real purpose being entwined before. It's the aha moment, it's the light bulb moment, it's the uncovering a plot moment, it's the hidden meaning, it's the idea. It's the idea at the core. That's what's exciting to me. Art without meaning is just decoration. The art is in the idea. There's a quote from Rick Rubin from his latest book. Now, I don't actually really subscribe to that idea. I think that's too derogative, simplistic. I think any steadfast rules about what is creative, what is art, what is real art is, it's a recipe for elitism and just a reductive way of looking at something so vastly silly and human as just creating stuff. So is it a rule? Is that a rule that you should have meaning, deep meaning, that you must say something? First of all, obviously it's not a rule. It's not a rule, but it's certainly an anxiety that I think a lot of people feel. I feel, you feel, I'm sure. Ooh, is there meaning? Have I actually put enough meaning? What am I going to write about? What have I got to say? What is my statement that I must say? Because when we say meaning, what is the meaning of this work? I think that conjures images of, well, what is the statement? We usually assume that we are looking for a statement from the artist about their particular worldview, their particular view of themselves, or the view of them looking back at you as the audience member, what have you. They're making some sort of statement. What is the artistic statement? I think the meaning could be as simple as curiosity. A perfect example is just whenever a new technology emerges, then inherently art is born. A huge new wave of art is created because humans are naturally curious creatures, and they will twist and break things until they yield some sort of interesting, exciting result. We do a lot of things simply because we must know if we can. I think that's meaning enough. But that's just a caveat. That's not actually the point of this episode that I'm trying to make here, is because I actually think it's really important to form a worldview, to form a view of the world around you locally, but also globally, historically, looking to the future, especially looking to yourself and your own emotions and your own way of being. I think it's important to develop that through research, be that reading or just speaking to people, go to school, talk to your mates, do whatever. But also through trial and error, being willing to actually admit when you've changed your mind on something. Develop that worldview and try and put it into your art as much as possible. I do think you should do that. However, that expectation and that anxiety of what is the meaning behind your art, what is the artistic statement, plays a heavy weight on your mind, on your conscious when you're trying to create, especially in those early moments of creation. I feel, at least I have felt it, I'm sure that you feel it as well. So what about when you have nothing to say or no real statement yet? It's kind of silly, but even before I was part of the Melbourne poetry scene, I always kind of identified as a poet. When I thought about what kind of creative are you? Are you a musician? Are you an actor? Are you a painter? A writer? Whatever. Even a writer, not a novelist. I'm not a novelist. I'd barely even write short stories. I've written maybe a handful. What am I? I think I've always identified as a poet, because I see poets as observers. Poets are the first responders. Poets identify the problems with the world and the beauty of the world. They're the first ones to see it. They can be a canary in the coal mine for social change. They can also be the only ones that actually see the beauty in a desolate world that others are trudging through. I know that's very romantic, but I mean, that's the point of being a poet, eh? And they build connections. I think they see the world as the web of connections, of infinite connections that it is. Where others see brick and mortar, they see entwined red bits of string coating the world, connecting everything. I'm curious about this. I'm curious about this ability for a lot of people. Don't get me wrong. I'm not putting poets up on a pedestal of like these divine beings of artistry. They're a dime a dozen, mate. But they play an important role. And I'm intrigued by the way that the human mind works. And that if there is a connection, I might be finding a connection where there is none. But if there is a connection between just the inherent pattern recognition of human beings and the way that poets see the world, the way that artists build connections. Pattern recognition is our greatest tool, mentally speaking, I would say. But it can also break and become an illness. There is a thing called apophenia, which is the tendency to perceive connections or meaningful patterns between unrelated or random things such as objects or ideas. This condition is particularly prevalent in the conspiracy theory scene, which I guess is kind of no surprise. Those who are into conspiracy theories love a pattern, they love a recognition. They love hidden pyramids and hidden satanic symbols scattered throughout literally every aspect of human society. Or pareidolia, which I might have mispronounced, is where you see faces and things. That's how you get things like Jesus toast. If you've ever seen Jesus toast, I'm sure that you have. Human beings, I mean, we've all got that to a degree anyway. We've all got the tendency to connect two ideas or two images or what have you, find patterns where there is no pattern to speak of. We are definitely born to recognize faces in everything that we see. So it can become a real hindrance as well to people. It can become a really dangerous thing, actually, especially when it comes to like conspiracy theories. And I feel like in a broader sense, especially on the internet, now that every single human being has the ability to put out content and video essays and podcasts like this one, building connections between things that have no right being connected. I'm sure that I'm doing this in this very episode. I've already stated that I have. I've self-identified that I'm manually connecting red string across my back wall, trying to figure out what's the meaning of it all. I think it's inherently human. And in the artistic world, both the artists themselves and the audience are doing it. The reason this actually came to mind for me recently is due to learning more about emergent storytelling, which I've known for a long time of, thanks to video games. And emergent storytelling, simply, are stories that are not written, but they come about via random chance, or at least perceivably by random chance. It took me a long time to realize that that's why sport is so much fun. That's why sport brings the world together. Because human beings love stories. We adore stories, everything we do. We try and turn it into a story, be it drama in friend groups and families, but also on the football field. Once I realized that a story is unfolding in front of me while watching sport, be it as simple as the story of a single game, or the much longer story of the drama that plays out behind the scenes. When I got introduced to Formula One, I started to understand the politics of it all, and the history behind the teams, and suddenly I started to understand that, there's a story emerging in front of me here, and it's being updated in real time, and no one knows the outcome, because it's emergent storytelling. And you find that in video games as well. Video games are great at this. Games where a bunch of systems are thrown together, cobbled together, and they are all entwined in some capacity, but once you put in the chaotic factor that is the player, all sorts of havoc can break loose. And if you couple that with a mind, the viewer, the player, that is inherently, naturally inclined to find patterns and connections, then storylines will emerge, tales will be told. And the greatest example of this is Dwarf Fortress. And if you know anything about Dwarf Fortress, then you know that that's like the bread and butter. That's the reason you kind of play it. But for those who don't know Dwarf Fortress, it is possibly the most complex video game on the planet in terms of number of systems that are intertwined. And that's because it's a very simple game when it comes to graphically speaking. It's been built over 20 years, I think 20 years plus. And for a long time, the graphics weren't even real drawn graphics in any sense. They were simply ASCII. It's simply numerical and alphabetical symbols to represent the information that's being displayed on the screen. And in this game, you control, sort of loosely, a band of dwarves that are trying to mine, trying to develop a little mini society, go on adventures, yada yada yada. And because there are so many ridiculous systems that are operating together, then strange occurrences happen that were never intended by the creators, discovered by the players, and once again a story emerges. And my favourite, many's favourite, a very famous example of this idea, of these happenings within Dwarf Fortress, was the drunk cats situation, where a new patch rolled out, and they implemented code that gave some representation of what it was actually like to drink from a goblet. And so liquid was represented, just in code, this is all just in code, that when a dwarf would drink from a goblet, liquid would suddenly splosh out of the goblet and onto the floor. Most of it would be drunk by the dwarf, but some liquid would get onto the floor. Many years prior to that, I believe it was 8 years prior to that, they'd implemented another bit of code that said when a dwarf, or any character, any creature, walks through blood on the floor, then they will track little bloody footsteps along with them. Another system introduced. I'm not sure what point this one was introduced, but it was when cats clean themselves. When they lick their paws, do they ingest some of the thing that they are cleaning off themselves. Of course they do. And so that was again written just as a little line of code that says when a cat cleans itself, make the cat ingest whatever it had on it. And so when cats would walk through the tavern into the liquid beer on the ground, they would get it on their paws because of that code that would allow tracking of liquids originally intended for blood. Then the cat would clean itself and it would get drunk off the beer off the ground. But a line of the code said that when their cat ingests whatever was on its fur, give it a full dose. Just give it a full dose. And they didn't realize the particular consequences of this very particular situation arising with all these different systems intertwining. And so you got drunk dead cats in the bar, puking and then dying from alcohol poisoning. And they patched it and fixed it so the cats didn't get a full dose of the beer. They didn't get a full gallon of beer every time they licked their paws. But fans of Dwarf Fortress were kind of thrilled by this. They were thrilled by, and that's the whole point of the game, is these little tiny scenarios, little stories cropping up thanks to this nigh infinite sea of variables in Dwarf Fortress or any game. It's why so many games work, is because our brains are designed to connect the dots. Because you can give us a very loose idea of what's supposed to be happening, a representation on the screen of what's supposed to be happening. You can even just tell us through text and we will envision the rest, we'll connect the dots, we'll make a story out of it. You can drip feed the audience just these little nuggets, these little images, these little ideas, and they will do a lot of the work for you. And I think that's deeply helpful when you want to add much more meaning and story to not just games, but to your writing, to your music, to anything. Because not only stories arise, but details arise. The more you delve into the way that human beings add meaning and connection, I think you kind of start to realize that a lot of the deep meaning and deep detail of famous bits of work, or even simple bits of work that you might do yourself, when you see the meaning and the stories and the details that human beings can pick out of seemingly random happenings in the real world through conspiracy theories, but also through complex systems like Dwarf Fortress, I think it kind of begs to question the level of genius and intent behind many a famous piece of work. And I've got to preface this with, I don't mean this in a sense of that there are not genius creators out there, and there are not people who are really putting in the time to put extremely deep, complex meaning into their work. There are. But I'm saying this more as a way to kind of reframe it. Because I think when we experience it as audience members, when we experience our favorite pieces of art that has this deep, complex world to it and meaning to it that we get to immerse ourselves in, I think we often think to ourselves, bloody hell, how the fuck did they do this? Are they geniuses? And could I ever make something like this? And I think when you compare it to these worlds of emergent storytelling, of hidden complexity or emergent complexity in detail, then you can kind of start to see how this deeper meaning comes about in these other pieces of work through, I would just say, a lot more time and work, but also the way that these creators live their life and think about the world. When you live a life of curiosity and education, and I don't mean like going to school necessarily, but rather just constantly wanting to know more and connect the dots as much as you can in the world that either you are creating or inhabiting or want to seek more information on, then you yourself are now a pattern recognition machine and a pattern creating machine. And kind of one of the earlier times when I really kind of latched onto this idea in my head was listening to the series of Dissect that went into Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly. And Kendrick is someone that is known to anyone who's into rap and into just music in general as a lyrical genius. But it was listening to that podcast that kind of brought to mind that this level of detail, where almost every single line from a song can be picked apart and expanded upon into these impossibly complex political narratives and social commentaries, is perhaps I'm reaching here and I'm trying to build too much of a connection, but I feel like it almost seems nigh impossible to do that with a pure intent from the jump to give it that level of complexity. But rather, listening to it, what kind of started to piece together in my mind was that someone like Kendrick spends so much of their time reading and talking to people and ingesting so much information around the topics that they're talking about, that when it comes to write the thing, and over the time of writing the thing over and over and over again, that these bits of meaning, these tidbits, these little points of interest simply emerge from the wealth of knowledge that he has accrued. It finds its way into every single line. So in a sense, I'm kind of saying the same thing, that he has done it on purpose, but it's through the way that he lives his life. And obviously I'm purely speculating, but the reason I speculate, because it kind of reminds me of conspiracy theories once again, of that everything is connected, that everything is part of one giant narrative. Whereas if you look at it this way, the creation process is much more chaotic and happenstance and emergent. This is not a connection that I was intending to draw, but another quote from Rick Rubin that I've used numerous times now is that the goal in life is not to create, but is to live a life where creation of art in particular is inevitable. And I feel like you can do this with meaning as well. That if you wish to create meaningful art, if you wish to create art with complexity and fine detail, in terms of the idea, again, we're not talking about a skill of a particular craft, purely talking about the ideas behind art and the meaning behind art. If you want to create that complex, meaningful art, then I think you need to immerse yourself in as much education and life as possible to make that meaningful art an inevitability. And I actually find that takes the pressure off. Because then you're not comparing yourself necessarily to geniuses, you are comparing yourself to hard workers and those who seek information, those who seek education as much as possible. But that's a very tangible thing you can do. Is that if you want to write beautiful, complex poetry, then you should probably go out and live a bunch of life, see a bunch of sights, meet a bunch of people, and read a bunch of really good poetry, and really pull it apart and understand, like, why is this good? One other aspect, that's the emergent detail I find in art, and then there's the emergent storylines of art as well, when you live as much life around the art as possible, is that there will be emergent story attached to your art, of you yourself, the artist. To continue to use Kendrick as our example, a story that emerged in front of our eyes recently was the recent rap beef with Drake. A story we didn't know that was coming, a story that wasn't written, though each one's dialogue was written. Seeing the storyline that emerged out of that, and that gave Kendrick's career such a boost and such a impact, gave it a lot more meaning, culturally speaking, over the past year. That he's no longer just I guess he was always kind of seen as like this savior of hip hop, but that's like so many artists get called the savior of their genre. I feel like that was a real moment where like, well, let me tell you the story, or let the story emerge of why that might actually be the goddamn case. I really like the story that goes beyond the page, the way that our art is connected to the life that we live and the greater context of it. Because again, it's just inherently human to seek out those patterns in those stories. The stories we encounter in life are emergent. Everything is chaos. Everything is impossibly complex variables. Infinite in their scope. Unknowable by any individual. And so too is the way that we make art, and the way that we live our lives, the way that we connect those two things. And it is also true, it is also the way that it is perceived by the audience. You can't control the way that the audience perceives your work, the meaning that they impose upon it. They are seeing it through their own lenses and their own experiences. And I find that a very exciting prospect when it comes to putting meaning into my work. And that's a big part of the reason why I enjoy chasing imagery as much as possible, because it allows people to put their own spin on it, to get their own stories and their own details out of it. I'm attaching the complex web of memories and experiences and thoughts in my head through my art, through this tunnel into your brain, and you are putting all of your experiences and the web of emotions and thoughts and knowledge as a lens onto the work. Now there is another infinite set of variables on the other end that is creating new details and new storylines. We can't help it. We're obsessed with it. We're obsessed with building those connections, those pathways, those stories. So if you give the audience these little clues, breadcrumbs, that seemingly point in a direction, head this way, follow me, they could be not meaningless, but with no greater intent, but with no greater depth to them. To be a little ambiguous is not a bad thing. Especially considering that not only will the audience do this, but they will love it. It's what I'm looking for as an audience member. And again, I want to say, don't get me wrong, that I do think that you should say something. If you have something to say in that moment, you should develop that worldview, that point of view, and put it into your work as much as possible. And you should work hard, and you should polish these works, and you should cut the fat, of course, as much as you can. But a big part of the experience, as both a creator and as the audience, is that curiosity. Is that emergent detail, emergent storylines that comes out of delving headfirst into the chaos, building out these little worlds and images that allow our minds to just run in all different directions. It's what I'm looking for when I'm writing these podcast episodes. I'm trying to start with kind of a loose idea of what I'm looking for, what I'm talking about. But then every time I'm actually really hunting for that thing that will emerge from it. That connection that was unexpected. That storyline that was unexpected. Again, that aha moment. And the greatest outcome of making these has been getting any bit of feedback from people where they riff on it, where they go, oh, that's interesting, and then it made me think about this. It's a conversation, but those have been the best moments of when people have hit me up, said, oh, mate, you have no idea what you triggered in me today. I went off in all kinds of weird directions off that last episode. I really hope that you actually build connections to things that were not there, that I did not intend. And in fact, just as I finished putting together the loose script for this episode, I got a message from a mate saying, hey man, I listened to your latest EP and I walked away from it with so much creativity and so many ideas based on the images that you were putting into your work. They just kept riffing, they kept running off in all these weird directions with ideas that I had no intention of putting in there. And I sent them a message back saying that's all I could ever hope for. That's the fucking point. It's what I love so much about trying to build little jumping off points in my music, and especially in this podcast, is to just dislodge some stuff and inspire some thoughts in other people. It makes me very, very happy. So this episode, I feel like, was a lot of ideas jostling for attention. I feel like it was a lot of red string connecting things that had, again, no right in being connected. So I do apologize. But for this particular episode, you might need to do some of the work. Thank you for listening, mate. I hope you've enjoyed this loose connection of ideas. And I hope that it takes some of the pressure off in terms of finding that meaning. You will get that meaning. There will be deeper meaning to the work, but you might find it along the way. It might not be some genius idea of yours, but just something that might emerge. For those who have been listening to this podcast for a little while, the few of you that have, I thought I'd just mention that, I'm taking a lot longer to make episodes at the moment because I am feeling a lot lower self-esteem when it comes to making podcasts. I guess kind of a realization of like how little I know about what I'm talking about. And so I'm trying to operate solely on that curiosity. I'm trying to take my time with it, trying to allow those storylines and those tidbits and those ideas to emerge. But I guess through that process, then they will take longer to emerge. I've also been furiously busy and finishing off several other projects all at the same time. So I have had very little time while starting new jobs as well and doing all kinds of shit. And I realize how that feeling of needing to put something out, that desire to put something out, be it an idea that I've imposed upon myself, a schedule I've imposed upon myself, or what have you, some sort of expectation, it doesn't give enough time for those emergent moments to come about. So I don't know if this episode is going to be the answer to that conundrum that's in my head at the moment, but it's something that I've been thinking on a lot. So I have no idea how frequent episodes will be. I could get a second wind any moment, or I could continue to kind of troll along the bottom of thoughts and ideas when it comes to these. But nonetheless, I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. I hope it sent your mind off in a different direction. This has been In the Back of My Head podcast. I hope that I can piece something together out of this episode once I go to editing. Be well, mate. Keep creating stuff. Just keep working and see what comes about. I'll catch you next time, mate. Be well.